extension?
Yes.
Good. Otherwise it'll be
That'll be coming.
I know, Marcy used to
Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Desai Buddha Desha Mata Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tanamane Namaste Saraswati Devi Guru Vishayani Visheshishu. I got a question.
Okay.
Oh, there she is. All right, move this. Haribo.
Hello.
Check the level.
Lady out there. Should I ask her to come in?
Who is it?
I spoke with her. She'll be coming. I think that's Chris's mom.
Oh. Sorry, not the level.
Chris?
He's in the kitchen. You know, the slaps that up. Very brave. Always.
Still.
Can you
Lower?
turn this down? Oh, Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavala Jai Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Sajajanarandana Yashodanandana Sajajanarandana Yamuna Tira Vanchari Yamuna Tira Vanchari Jaya Radha Madhava Sundari Jaya Radha Madhava Sundari Jai Mr. Bhagavad Gita Church, Ashtotra, the Shishima, His Divine Grace, Shivasi, Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON, the Gita Church, Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Mr. Bhagavad Gita Church, Ashtotra, the Shishima, His Divine Grace, Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananda Koti Vaishnavina Ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Guru and Guranga. So, welcome. Before you sit down, pick up a book. Take a book. Oh, you want to sit there? You can sit there if you like. Your name, you're Chris's mother?
I am.
What's your name?
Jessica.
What is it?
Jessica.
Jessica?
Jessica.
Jessica. Welcome, Jessica. Thank you. Can you sit on this side, because we might have some more men coming, and that's kind of the lady side over there. You can you sit there and take that book.
Are you used to sitting on the floor?
You can sit on a chair.
You better sit on the chair.
I try to sit on the floor.
I know.
If you get stiff, you can just sit on the chair.
It's okay for a few minutes.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Page 529. On the 6th day of March, 2018, in SanDiego, we're reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. We are beginning a new chapter tonight, chapter 13, entitled Nature, the Enjoyer, and Consciousness. And it's on page 529, takes 1 and 2. Arjuna Vacha,
Arjuna Vacha,
Prakritim Purusham Chaiva,
Prakatim Purusham Chaiva.
Chaitram Chaitra Gyamevacha,
Chaitram Chaitram Janejava.
Etad Vedata Vichami,
Etad Vedatam Ijami.
Jnanam Geyam Chikeshava,
Dhyanam Jainam Kachisava.
Shri Bhagavan Vacha,
Shri Bhagavan Vacha.
Idam Shariram Kaunteya,
Idam Shariyam Kunteya,
Chaitram Itcha Vidhiyate,
Chaitram Iti Vidiyate,
Etad Yovetitam Prahu,
Etad Yovetitam Prabhu,
Chaitragya Titad Vidaha,
Chaitragya Titad Vidaha.
Arjuna Vacha,
Arjuna Vacha.
Prakatim Purusham Chaiva,
Prakatim Purusham Chaiva.
Chaitram Chaitra Gyamevacha,
Chaitram Chaitram Janejava.
Etad Vedata Vichami,
Etad Vedam Vijami.
Jnanam Geyam Chikeshava,
Dhyanam Jainam Kachisava.
Shri Bhagavan Vacha,
Shri Bhagavan Vacha.
Idam Shariram Kaunteya,
Idam Shariram Kaunteya.
Chaitram Itcha Vidhiyate,
Chaitram Mitam Raviyate.
Etad Yovetitam Prahu,
Etad Yovitatam Prabhu.
Chaitragya Iti Tad Vidaha.
Chaitra Charitam Viha.
Just the first one.
Okay. Arjuna Vacha,
Arjuna Vacha,
Prakritim Purusham Chaiva,
Prakatim Purusham Chaiva,
Chaitram Chaitra Jamevacha,
Chaitram Chaitra Gyamevacha,
Etad Viditam Ichami,
Etad Vedatam Vichami,
Yadam Yeham Chakeshava,
Jnanam Geyam Chikeshava,
Shri Bhagavan Vacha.
Shri Bhagavan Vacha,
Idam Shariram Kaunteya.
Idam Shariram Kaunteya,
Ishtam Etam Avatite.
Chaitram Itcha Vidhiyate,
Eta Yovitatam Haha.
Etad Yovetitam Prahu,
Kesha Jan Ita Tadvida.
Chaitragya Iti Tad Vidaha. Word by word means. Arjuna Uvacha, Arjuna said, Prakatim, nature, Purusham, the enjoyer, Cha, also Eva, certainly, Chaitram, the field, Chaitragyam, the knower of the field, Eva, certainly, Cha, also Etad, all this, Veditam, to understand, Ichami, I wish. Jnanam, knowledge, Geyam, the object of knowledge, Cha, also Kesava, Krishna. And Sri Bhagavan Vacha, the personality of God, had said, Idam, this Shariram, body, Kaunteya, O son of Kunti, Chaitram, the field, iti thus abhidiyate is called. Eta, this Yaha, one who, Veti, knows, tam he, Prabhu, is called Chaitra Yaha, the knower of the field. Iti thus tat vidaha, by those who know this. Translation. Arjuna said, O my dear Krishna, I wish to know about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, and the field and the knower of the field, and of knowledge and the object of knowledge. The Supreme Personality of God had said, this body, O son of Kunti, is called the field, and one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. Report. Arjuna was inquisitive about Prakriti, nature, Purusha, the enjoyer, Chaitra, the field, Chaitragya, its knower, and knowledge and the object of knowledge. When he inquired about all these, Krishna said that this body is called the field, and that one who knows this body is called the knower of the field. This body is the field of activity for the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul is entrapped in material existence, and he attempts to lord it over material nature.
And so, according to his capacity to dominate material nature, he gets a field of activity. That field of activity is the body. And what is the body? The body is made of senses. Before we continue, can you run in the back there and close that kitchen door? Because they're coming in. Thank you. Body is made of senses. The conditioned soul wants to enjoy sense gratification, and according to his capacity to enjoy sense gratification, he is offered a body or field of activity. Therefore, the body is called the chaitra, or the field of activity for the conditioned soul. Now, the person who should not identify himself with the body is called Kshetrajna, the knower of the field. It is not very difficult to understand the difference between the field and its knower, the body and the knower of the body. Any person can consider that from childhood to old age he undergoes so many changes of body, and yet is still one person remaining. Thus there is a difference between the knower of the field of activities and the actual field of activities. A living conditioned soul can thus understand that he is different from the body. It is described in the beginning, Dehinosmin, that the living entity is within the body, and that the body is changing from childhood to boyhood, from boyhood to youth, and from youth to old age. And the person who owns the body knows that the body is changing. The owner is distinctly Kshetrajna. Sometimes we think, I am happy. I am a man. I am a woman. I am a dog. I am a cat. These are the bodily designations of the knower. Page 530. You're welcome. These are the bodily designations of the knower. But the knower is different from the body. Although we may use many articles, our clothes, etc., we know that we are different from the things used. Similarly, we also understand by a little contemplation that we are different from the body. I or you or anyone else who owns the body is called Kshetrajna, the knower of the field of activities. And the body is called the Kshetra, the field of activities itself. In the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the knower of the body, the living entity, and the position by which he can understand the Supreme Lord are described. In the middle 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the relationship between the individual soul and the super soul in regard to devotional service are described. The superior position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the subordinate position of the individual soul are definitely defined in these chapters. The living entities are subordinate under all circumstances, but in their forgetfulness they are suffering. When enlightened by pious activities, they approach the Supreme Lord in different capacities, as the distressed, those in want of money, the inquisitive, and those in search of knowledge. That is also described. Now, starting with the 13th chapter, how the living entity comes into contact with material nature and how it is delivered by the Supreme Lord through the different methods of fruitive activities, cultivation of knowledge, and the discharge of devotional service are explained. Although the living entity is completely different from the material body, he somehow becomes related. This also is explained. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Jnanandana Shalakya Chakshu Unmitatam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance. My spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance unto him and to all members of Sri Parampara, the Supreme Succession. So, as Srila Prabhupada refers to here in this purport, the 6 middle chapters of the Bhagavad Gita deal with essential information and culminates with the 12th chapter, which you just finished, which is all about devotional service or bhakti. Now Arjuna is asking Krishna some questions in which he will, and the answers, he will go over some of the material he's dealt with before. But there's a slightly different focus here and terminology. So there's 6 questions here. He was sitting there. You can sit here. Yeah. There are 6 items that Arjuna wants clarified. There's Prakriti and Purusha. They're like pairs. Prakriti, Purusha, Kshetra, Kshetrajna, and Jnanam and Gayam, which means the energy and the enjoyer or source of all energy. Prakriti is energy of different kinds. And Purusha is the source of the energy. Knowledge, we know what that means, more or less. And Gayam is the object of knowledge. Where does the knowledge ultimately lead? We may not have that concept so firmly entrenched in us in the West, but there's actually an object to all the knowledge. It's not just the search that we're after, but we want to actually get somewhere. And then comes the Chaitra Gya, and what was the other? Purusha, Prakriti Purusha, Chaitra Gya, or the body of field of activities and the knower of the field, and the knowledge and the goal of knowledge. So Krishna is going to systematically answer those questions. The first question is, what is this body and what is the knower of the field? And Krishna says, the body is the field. Now, how is the body like a field? When you think about it, everything we experience is happening through the medium of the senses and the mind, and how we reach out to the world. So even though we feel that our field of activity is much broader than just this body, when it comes down to it, it is how that broader field, our environment, impinges on our body, and we are aware of it, that really is constituting our experience. There's millions of things going on in this world we have no idea, and they're really not affecting us. They're not part of our field of activity. But when they come into our we see them, or hear them, or smell them, or we have some memory of having done that before somehow, that's really our experience. So in a very real sense, this body is our field of activity. Now, it's described elsewhere that there are these different kinds of senses. We have what we normally call the senses in Western terminology, the five senses. They're all in the head, right? The ears, the eyes, and the nose, and the taste, and the touch. Right? That's the senses. But the Vedic culture recognizes the active senses. Our hands are also important kinds of senses. Our voice is a very important kind of sense. Reproductive organs like that. So these are other parts of our field that we interact with this world with, both in an active sense and in a receptive sense. So then the critical question is, who is the knower of the field? In ignorance, we identify ourselves with the field. This is very clearly explained right at the beginning of the second chapter. Arjuna's the whole drama of the Bhagavad Gita is that it's on a battlefield, which is the last place you would think there'd be some philosophical discussion, but it's important that it is. Because Arjuna, he's the protagonist, if you will, and he is the greatest warrior on the side of of virtue, say, the five Pandavas they represent. And the battle, they tried to avoid the battle, they couldn't avoid it, you know the story. And so Arjuna wants to see who's ready to fight. Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has taken the role of the chariot driver, which is a subordinate role, a servant. He's taken role as a servant. He said, I will not fight. But Arjuna says, I don't care, you stay on my side. Duryodhana took his armies. There's a whole story there in the Mahabharata, where Duryodhana and Arjuna both went to see Krishna. And Krishna was sleeping at the time. So they waited for him to wake up. Duryodhana stayed by the head. He figured he would have an advantage when Krishna woke up. And Arjuna stood by the feet. He felt natural. They stayed there. So when Krishna woke up, he immediately looked at Arjuna. And he said, well, Arjuna, since I saw you first, you can take your choice, the pick. I will not fight in this battle, this upcoming war. But I have this huge army. So you can take either my armies, or you can take me. And Duryodhana said, Duryodhana was grinding his teeth, and he figured, I lost out because Arjuna's going to take the armies, but he didn't. He took Krishna alone, who wouldn't fight. So Duryodhana said, oh great, I'll take the armies. But having Krishna on your side is certain victory. So that the way it played out is that just when all the armies are on both sides, poised for the battle, in fact they already had blown the conch shells. The conch shells were blown in the first chapter. So Arjuna then wants to see who's on either side, who's on the other side who'd come to fight. And on the other side he saw his friends, his relatives, blood relatives, And he saw Bhishma Dev, the honored grandfather, who, you know, the last thing in the world, which he says explicitly, I want to shoot. Even if they attack me, I would rather not attack them. Referring to Bhishma Dev and Dronacharya, who was his teacher of martial arts. So Arjuna is in a quandary because on the material side, he doesn't care about the kingdom now. He says, I'd rather go off to the forest and be a beggar than enjoy this kingdom, which would be soaked with the blood of the people who I love. What's the point? You know. So, and then he had other Vedic arguments. He said, if I engage in this battle and kill so many thousands of warriors, their wives will all be widows and they'll be unprotected and will create havoc in society. I'll be on the hook for all these sinful reactions, and you know. So from different angles, he had arguments that you know, he didn't want to fight. But he knew that Krishna wanted him to fight, so he's torn between the two. He's kind of paralyzed. He calls it karpanya dosha, means miserly weakness, or the weakness that comes from being pushed off of your actual dharma, not in your natural state. So that's his dilemma. So finally, his solution is to surrender to Krishna as a disciple, rather than to argue with him as a so-called friend. Now, he was his friend, but he was taking this role of argument. And so as soon as he did that, then the whole thing changed. And Krishna chastised him. So you're lamenting for what is not worthy of grief, namely the physical body, when what's really important is the soul. And this is the basis of any progress in spiritual life, self-realization. To understand the difference between the body and the self. And this is the disease, the material disease, is based on that illusion that we are the body. Because if we're the body and there's no soul, or you're not aware of it, then your concerns and your hopes and your aspirations are all centered on the body. To be happy, to be safe, to be successful. But ultimately the force of time defeats that hope. There's no security here. I mean, it's obvious. In the beginning of the Bhagavatam second canto, there's another dramatic scene, very dramatic. You have a king who's a descendant of Arjuna, who has, you know, these virtuous kings. He was actually keeping back the advent of Kali Yuga. It was the beginning of Kali Yuga, and Kali had insinuated he was torturing a bull and a cow, which would symbolize the earth and dharma and virtue. And so Brigid stopped him, and he, you know, he was doing all these wonderful things. But then he was cursed by this ignorant Brahmin boy, and he accepted the curse to die in 7 days by the bite of this poisonous animal. And so he gave up the kingdom, the whole emperorship. Took off his kingly garb and just sat by the bank of the Ganges, waiting for whatever would happen. And all the great sages and saints that came not only from this planet, from other higher planes, to witness this scene. And Shukadeva Goswami comes, who's the most learned Vaishnava. And he comes and he sits there on a seat like this, a Vyasasana, to speak the Srimad Bhagavatam. And right when he begins his instructions to Brigid wants to know, well, what should I do now that I know I'm going to die in 7 days? What should I think of? What should I do with my mind? You know, it's a very critical situation. So, Shukadeva Goswami praises the question, says, very good question. This question and its answer is beneficial for everyone, the speaker, the listener, and those who listen in. You know, and there's many listening in at that scene right in the back there. And then he says, Shota Vyadini Rajanya Ninam Santi Sahasrasha Pashatam Apatatman Viheshu Vihamedinam. He says, for those who are bereft of any spiritual understanding, there's millions of subjects for hearing. You see? Hearing and chanting. People's minds get absorbed in any subject matter, but mundane subject matter. But these subjects don't help us to transcend the birth and the round of birth and death. The problem with dying is not that it's the end of your life, it's that it's just a transition to another life. You die, but you don't die. You know, I mean, everybody who dies, at least in the human form, the first thing that happens when you die is that you understand, I'm not dead. What's going on? Either you're going to a better place or we're reading in the morning in our third canto. You're getting hauled off the Yamaraj for judgment. But anyway you look at it, you're not dead. You're just, this body's just gone. It's like your very complicated virtual reality machine just broke down, but you're still alive to go into another one. So Shukadev said the material life is one of wasting time. Is that in this concept of life, what did he say? Waste time at night, either with sleeping or sex life, in the day just earning money and going is like this. And in order to fend off the dangers of this world, you have soldiers, various soldiers. He calls them fallible soldiers. You put your faith in them, but they can't really help you. Beginning with your body itself. We try to keep it healthy and fit, because we know, disease is a great danger. But eventually, you lose the battle, And then you have your relatives and your friends, and your insurance policy and everything else, and your taxes, your defense department, right? But they're all fallible soldiers. And it's not a mystery. And there's this phrase in Sanskrit, pasyanapita pashyati, means although seeing, you don't really see. In other words, you don't understand the implications of it. You don't want to believe it, you see. So, Shukadev says, therefore, anyone who understands this reality should absorb himself in sound vibration that allows him to become enlightened and to transcend the bodily concept of life, to put it simply. In other words, to understand, first of all, our spirit, not matter, to re-establish the eternal relationship that we've forgotten from eons with the Supreme Spirit, and hopefully to perfect that relationship of love and loving devotion so that we don't have to come back again. This is the basic principle of self-realization. Now, in Bhakti Yoga, it goes beyond that, because that's an impetus to follow the path, but as you follow the path, you come to a higher realization that the highest state of being is to be in a state of loving relationship with God, and that includes any liberation. The desire for liberation is the desire, one's own desire to be free from suffering. But the desire to serve God and to love God, that's a higher desire. It includes the other. So that's all included in Bhakti Yoga. So back to our Bhagavad Gita here. So the basic principle is that we have to know, and that's the answer here. The body is the field of our activity. One who knows this body is the knower of the field. So the question then arises as we go through this chapter, the next chapter, how to act within this body, because it's like a tool. It's a great opportunity, human form of life. The cats and the dogs, they can't understand this philosophy. They're also embodied souls, just like us. On a soul platform, we're exactly equal. With even the plants, there's a soul in there. In every plant, you can see there's some consciousness there. And but they're so covered over that all they can do is just go through that term and gradually evolve in consciousness till they also come to the human form. Every soul eventually gets this chance. So we're now in this human form of life. We shouldn't waste it, and we shouldn't waste any time. That's why the few of us sitting here in this class and the few of in the world of the internet are the most fortunate people in SanDiego. It doesn't matter what big house you have or what, doesn't matter. What matters is that we're able to use our special human intelligence for inquiring into this matter. And we've come to the right source, Prabhupada's precious books, which were written entirely simply to give us the knowledge that, people write books to make for fame and wealth, whatever. Not at all. We're on page 530. And so Srila Prabhupada is giving this knowledge, as he would say, the transparent, he would call it the via medium, but really it means medium. In other words, this whole idea, it's not, you don't hear it so much anymore, but it really is good for us. This I had channeling. Remember the old thing with channeling? Where someone, I'm channeling this person, this Zoroaster from 1,000 years ago. And people would believe it. They would start some cult, make some money. No, the real channeling, he probably didn't call it that, but that's what he means, is that without distorting the message, he's giving Krishna's words here. This translation, it's not a mystery. The Sanskrit is very plain. You know, and the key is the explanation. He's not distorting it. He's not trying to obscure Krishna. He's trying to bring forth Krishna. You know, and Krishna is all of our guru eternally. He's the Adi Guru, the original guru of everyone. We have a succession called the Parampara. Parampara simply means a series. It's a series of spiritual masters and disciples who in turn, some of them become spiritual masters themselves, who act as transparent media for Krishna's words. Now, Prabhupada's greatest gift of all was to break it out of the Sanskrit and the Bengali and give it to us in English. You know, and this was the greatest benefit, if there was any other benefit, I'm not sure of it, of the British, you know, rule of India, is that they taught English. You know, any occupying country does that, right? So Prabhupada was schooled in English. Bless the Lord, you know, thank God. And he was able to, pretty good English, and he was able to translate. And when he came to America, he engaged me. You know, I'm not a great English scholar, but you know, I had a good K-12 education. You know, and you know, we could work on this book so it's suitable English, it's acceptable English. In other words, the knowledge, what really counts is the philosophy, the knowledge, the realization, and it comes through in you know, a nice form, so that we can, from that gets translated in all kinds of languages. A friend of mine, there's a real amazing story. He happened to be preaching in India, distributing books, and he went to Kashmir to distribute Prabhupada's books in a Muslim country. They didn't have Arab books, you know, in any Arab language. They had English books, but he still went there. And when he came back, and he saw Prabhupada. He and a friend, I think it was Vyasaki, who's now a very famous Kirtani. And Prabhupada was just overjoyed. He said, anyone who distributes in Muslim lands, you know, automatically goes back to God and gets the blessing, you know, because it's so risky, right? Can you imagine? So he's made it his, he does other things, you know, but he's one of the trustees, the managers of the BBT, and he especially focuses on these books in Arabic. And he's found that one of the best ways of distributing these books is, because, you know, you can't go to Saudi Arabia and distribute books, but there's so many, they travel, you know, so he has books in Arabic language and also Chinese and other languages like that. And they distribute them on the streets of LA and New York, where there are so many, you know, students, wealthy, you know, this is the upper crust. They come and they're fascinated by this in their own language, you know, and they take them back to you know, this way the seeds are planted. You know. But it's the same words in the foreign language. So the translators and the, you know, they're often revolutionaries, just like Gutenberg, you know, by creating that press so that average persons could actually read the Bible, not just the few who could copy them by hand in the churches. That created a revolution in consciousness. You know, it started a revolution. So Prabhupada is doing it with his books, and here we have this knowledge Krishna's giving. So Prabhupada, he spends this whole first paragraph, you know, going over this very important first step. And when you think about it, it changes everything. When you understand your spirit, your eternal spirit, you're not matter. And that this, you know, like I like to say, that this life we have is just a very short chapter in a very long book. It's not everything. It's not that you came into existence when you were born and you will go out of existence when you die. And therefore, one has to ask the question, well, okay, I'm a reasonable person, I'm a prudent person, I want to plan for the future, I want to have the best future I can. But that future is way beyond just the limits of this body. That's the whole point. If you're just, if your aspirations and your hopes and your plans and your activities are just on the basis of the body, then it's like, you know, how many analogies Prabhupada would give. The bird in the cage, you ever hear that one? Maybe you haven't heard it so much anyway. So visualize a wealthy lady in New York, you know, and she wants to get, you know, she's living in an apartment, she wants to get a bird to take care of, you know. So many people get birds, different pets. So she goes to a shop, and it's a, you know, like Fifth Avenue. And so there's many exotic birds in wonderful cages, gold cages with jewels and everything, you know, like, you know, pay $1,000 or more. So she picked out one very wealthy and had it brought back to her park. You know. But so there you have the bird now in this very ornate cage. But being, let's call her a little bit potty, okay, she became enamored of the cage and forgot all about the bird. So she would carefully polish the cage and dust it, you know, and take pictures of it, maybe selfies, you know, today. But the poor bird wasn't getting fed, and the bird eventually keeled over, you know, and died in the cage. So similarly, we are, the soul is the bird in the cage of the body, and all we're thinking about, all we're planning on, all the aspirations have to do with the cage. We're not taking care of the interests of the soul itself. And so what are the needs of the soul? Now Prabhupada very poetically said this, and I wish I should have memorized it by now. But in the second chapter of the first canto, there's a whole series of verses that are very important. It's all about Dharma. And what Prabhupada says in one purport, that the needs of the soul are different from the body. The soul wants to break out of the covered universe and see the free light and the spirit. In other words, we yearn to be eternal, to be reinstated in our eternal life. We yearn to be reinstated in our eternal blissfulness, rather than this up and down life, and sometimes it's a peak experience with a lot of misery, and you know, even if you think you got it made, there's all this anxiety you might lose it. You know, that's not what we're meant for. As souls, we have part and parcel, this phrase is the famous phrase of Prabhupada's, we have Krishna's qualities in minute degree. Krishna is famously Satchidananda. What's the first verse of the Brahma Samhita? Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha Anadiradi Govinda Sarvakara Karma. That the supreme controller, God, if you will, is Krishna. And he has a form. He's not a force, he has a form, and he has a personality. So his form is Satchidananda. It's eternal, full of knowledge, infinite knowledge, and full of bliss. We are part and parcel of Krishna, so we have in our original form, in our original state, we are also Satchidananda. We have our eternal form that perfectly suited for this blissful relationship with Krishna. It may be the form of a cowherd boy, it may be the form of a worshiper of some kind. But somehow or other, in that kingdom of God, we have our form that we've long forgotten, but it's still in there. It's covered by this many, many, many external forms that we've taken on. So our goal in life should be to somehow get reinstated in that eternal, blissful life of knowledge. That's what this Krishna consciousness is all about. And so the difficulty is that we're now so habituated, probably conditioned, by our many, many births, and specifically this one, in this form, that we have no idea, first of all, who we are, how to get, you know, and if we are a spirit soul, how to realize it. So we're basically in ignorance. And we need guidance, and that's why Srila Prabhupada came to give us the eternal knowledge that was passed down to him, and that he realized, that he personified. And so, you know, he's carefully guiding us through, yes, here is this meditation Krishna gives us, Dehi no sminyata dehi. Think back, you know, how do I know I'm a soul? Well, just think back. You know, you were once a child, the first thing you remember, I always like to point out, I'm riding on a tricycle somewhere, I remember. What, 3, 4? You remember when you were 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Anyway, there's a certain first memory you can delve back in. And so, you know, I remember some things. I remember my second grade teacher, Mrs. Bolance, Miss Bolance. There was Ms. Bolance. And some of the grade school teachers, you know. I remember being bored, because I was in the Bluebirds, you know. And I would get my stuff done right away. I would start drumming on the desk with Duncan, beats from previous life. A few things like that, but there's a whole bunch of blank. I don't remember a whole bunch of other stuff. But I remember, yeah, I'm in second grade, you know. I can remember that. Okay, go through, you know, you can unreel some of the stuff, you know, childhood, yeah, adolescence, that was tough. You can get through, you know, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. I can remember some of that. So what am I remembering? You know, experiences, sensations I had. Most of you remember the intense emotional things that happened. Somebody blasted you, or, you know, whatever. All right, so what happened? Now, I definitely had a different body when I was 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, on and on. And I had a different mind too, different set of desires, and all kinds of stuff. But I myself, the Kshetragya, the knower of the field, have been the same person throughout. Therefore, I, the knower, am different from the field, the body. I'm not the body. The body is just a covering on the soul. God forbid, people sometimes lose a limb. Then you realize, well, the hand was very valuable, but it's not me. At least I survived. I'm still alive. No, you're the soul. You'll always be alive. But the point is, you were never the body. You never will be the body. It's just a covering, temporary covering that has a term limit and will never be seen again. So don't get hung up on it. Use it as a vehicle. These very ears and eyes and nose and everything that we try to gratify with us, don't do that. Use them in the prescribed way. There's a whole science of it, how we can connect with Krishna, especially through the ears, through sound, so that we can change our whole consciousness and not be so controlled by our lower self. But now Arjuna, Krishna will describe these different things one after another. What is the field? It's got all these different elements to it, and what's the knowledge? There's a wonderful section here from 8 to 11. There's four verses there describing different elements of knowledge. You'll never hear this in Western university, because universities everywhere and everything. Amanitvam, adambitvam, ahimsak, shantar, arjavam. Those are the first elements of this knowledge, about 20 of them. Amanitvam, freedom from pride. One has to be very humble. Amanitvam, adambitvam, no hypocrisy, no cheating. Non-violence, cleanliness. Where do you find that? What course is that taught of in SDSU? Any of those qualities? You don't find them in the teachers. You'll never find them in the students. So, but those are the essential elements by which you can actually become receptive to the transcendental knowledge that's being taught. So it's a science, and we've almost come to the 8 o'clock special hour when we read something. Any questions or comments on these first 2 verses? Bhagavad Chris.
So the field and the knower of the field, I don't know if it's the correct correlation, but it brings to mind the story of the 2 birds.
The 2 birds in the
tree.
In the tree.
The second bird being the self-satisfied, just there, and the other bird taking pleasure in the fruits and flying from tree to tree and this and that.
Well, that's actually, that takes in text number 3. Because in the next verse, Krishna says, I'm also the knower in every body, every field. There's 2 knowers. There's not just the soul, there's also the super soul. And that's the bird who's aloof. He's not taking part in the senses. The individual bird, the soul, the Atma, who's in illusion, he doesn't know about the other bird. He's just absorbed in trying to eat the fruits of the tree. And those fruits are the pleasures of senses. You see? And the witness bird, the super soul bird, the God, he's just witnessing and hoping that the bird will get turned to him. You see? As long as the individual bird is trying to enjoy those fruits, he stays bound up, and goes from tree to tree, basically. But the super soul bird is always following him. He's always accompanying him. You're never alone. So now we can't hear that bird, so Krishna, he speaks through the books and through the great enlightened souls. That's how he reaches us. Otherwise, we have no chance, because we're not, we're in this tightly bound by illusion. So we need an intervention. That's the thing. Someone who's totally addicted, he can't do it on his own. He needs an intervention. Someone who loves him has to shake him and says, no, you're coming to rehab. This temple is kind of like rehab. We're trying to get, we're trying to kick our addiction to the material energy. And it works if we follow the program. So Krishna, he's coming in the form of the spiritual master, in the form of the Shastra. All right, so we'll pick up there on text 3 tomorrow. And now we'll go to our reading of the Nectar of Devotion, right? We're reading Krishna. So I don't know how much you know about our books and stuff, but we have one book called The Nectar of Devotion, which was written in Sanskrit about 450 years ago, and which gives a very systematic description of the process of devotional service. You know, the different steps, what to avoid, and what you can experience also. It's a very good book. We're just beginning it, a reading of it. We've taken it up because this used to be the standard back in the day when I joined, early 70s. So the Nectar of Devotion, and let's see. All right, so that's not where we are. Okay. Introduction. Yes. Okay, let's see. Devotional service, this is the introduction. Devotional service means to prosecute Krishna conscious activities that are favorable to the transcendental pleasure of the Supreme Lord Krishna. And any activities that are not favorable to the transcendental favor of the Lord cannot be accepted as devotional service. For example, great demons like Ravana, Kamsa, and Hiranyakashipu were always thinking of Krishna, or in the case of Ravana, Rama, same person, different name. But they were thinking of him as their enemy. This sort of thinking cannot be accepted as bhakti or Krishna consciousness. The impersonalists sometimes misunderstand devotional service in such a way that they divide Krishna from his paraphernalia and pastimes. For example, the Bhagavad Gita is spoken on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and the impersonalists say that although Krishna is of interest, the battlefield of Kurukshetra isn't. The devotees, however, also know that the battlefield of Kurukshetra by itself has nothing to do with their business, but in addition they know that Krishna does not mean just Krishna alone. He's always with his associates and paraphernalia. For instance, if someone says, give something to eat to the man with the weapons, the eating process is done by the man, not by the weapons. Similarly, in Krishna consciousness, a devotee may be interested in the paraphernalia and locations, such as the battlefield of Kurukshetra, that are associated with Krishna, but he is not concerned with simply any battlefield. He's concerned with Krishna, his speech, his instructions, etc. It is because Krishna is there that the battlefield is so important. So this concept Prabhupada would often illustrate with the mother and child. He would say that in this world, the love that a mother has for a child is the purest thing we have because it's so selfless, especially when the child is completely helpless, newborn. You know, the mother's whole focus is on, is the child comfortable, happy, safe, healthy? Then she feels okay. You know, the child may not even know what the mother is. It's just like a big, a big ball of warmth and love, and that's basically it, nourishment. But gradually, So the child grows up, and eventually is the first day of school, right? Kindergarten. So the child, has lived with the mother, and and assuming that it's a rarity today. It's there's a mother and father, and the mother goes to work, the father goes to work, and the mother stays home with the kids. Does that happen anymore? No. Anyway, I grew up did you grow up in a family like that? So anyway, this is an ideal situation. So there's a room where the kid's room, and in that room is all this paraphernalia. And there's a little shoe that he wore when he was 2 years old. She finds it under the bed. Now it's his first day. He's been taken. He's in the hands of the kindergarten. So she sees that shoe, and a tear comes to the eye. She remembers, I remember when he first walked, and it's that, right? And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of experiences like that that you go through. The point is that the shoe, any old shoe isn't it? It's the fact that the shoe is related to the child. It evokes memories because of the connection. And the same thing is true for all of these holy places, like Kurukshetra, especially Vrindavan, where Krishna has his pastimes. He had pastimes in Kurukshetra, and there's so many holy places like that. A temple like this can also evoke it, because everything in here is meant to remind you of Krishna. So if you're Krishna conscious, then this is a nectarian place to come to. People come from all over the county to visit here, just to see Radha Giridhari. Because that statue, it reminds them, there's a relationship built up. So the same thing is true here. This is a summary understanding of what Krishna consciousness is. Without this understanding, one is sure to misunderstand why the devotees are interested in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. One who is interested in Krishna becomes interested in his different pastimes and activities. The definition of a pure devotee, as given by Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, can be summarized thus. His service is favorable and is always in relation to Krishna. In order to keep the purity of such Krishna-conscious activities, one must be freed from all material desires and philosophical speculation. He's still describing this important verse in Yabhilasha Das Shunyam. Any desire except for the service of the Lord is called material desire, and philosophical speculation refers to the sort of speculation that ultimately arrives at the conclusion of voidism or impersonalism. This conclusion is useless for a Krishna-conscious person. Only rarely by philosophical speculation can one reach the conclusion of worshipping Vasudeva or Krishna. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita itself. The ultimate end of philosophical speculation, then, must be Krishna, with the understanding that Krishna is everything, the cause of all causes, and that one should therefore surrender to him. If this ultimate goal is reached, then philosophical advancement is favorable. But if the conclusion of philosophical speculation is voidism or impersonalism, that's not bhakti. Karma, or fruit of activities, are sometimes understood to be ritualistic activities. There are many persons who are very much attracted by the ritualistic activities described in the Vedas. But if one becomes attracted simply to ritualistic activities without understanding Krishna, his activities are unfavorable to Krishna consciousness. Actually, Krishna consciousness can be based simply on hearing, chanting, remembering Krishna, etc. Described in the Srimad Bhagavatam are 9 different processes, besides which everything done is unfavorable to Krishna consciousness. Thus, one should always be guarding against fall downs. Rupa Goswami has also mentioned in his definition of bhakti the word jnana karmadi. This karmadi, fruit of work, consists of activities that are unable to help one attain to pure devotional service. Many forms of so-called renunciation are also not favorable to Krishna-conscious devotional service. Srila Rupa Goswami has also quoted a definition from the Narada Pancharatra as follows. One should be free from all material designations, and by Krishna consciousness must be cleansed of all material contamination. He should be restored to his pure identity, in which he engages his senses in the service of the proprietor of the senses. This is his verse, Sarvapadi Vinimuktam. You familiar with that? Maybe not. So when our senses are engaged for the actual proprietor of the senses, that is called devotional service. The phrase is Rishikesha, Rishikena, Sevana. Rishika means the senses. Isha means Lord. The Lord of the senses is Krishna. Our senses should be, but now we're trying to gratify him separate from him. So when with our senses we serve the Lord of the senses, then that's bhakti. And in that service we feel completely free from all false designations. In other words, we're transcendental to the bodily concept of life. In our conditioned state, our senses are engaged in serving these bodily demands. When these same senses are engaged in executing the order of Krishna, our activities are called bhakti. As long as one identifies himself as belonging to a certain family, a certain society, or a certain person, he's said to be covered with designations. When one is fully aware that he doesn't belong to any family, society, or country, but is eternally related to Krishna, he then realizes that his energies should be employed not in the interests of so-called family, society, or country, but in the interests of Krishna. This is purity of purpose and the platform of pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness. And that's very good timing. We just finished the introduction. So next time we read Nectar Devotion, we'll begin chapter what? Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. And now we're going to have a little ceremony. These curtains will open. Have you ever seen the deities? Really? You see. But it's even special when you see them live. You'll see. You got this nice new mic. Don't switch over your head and anything. Come on. Oh, sorry, you gotta come. What's happening with this painting job? Is that going to happen?
She's a little embroiled in family life.
Grandmother? I'm sorry. I won't do it. Did you hear? Good job.
Have you been inside the temple for Saigon? Yeah. You can live yourself. Regretting not taking that suit. Regretting not taking the suit.
Yeah, and you don't want to take it much too late either, because then it can keep you awake. So I haven't used them in such a long time, but they do help. Especially allergies, like pretty bad allergy attacks. And it's good, like, clear all that out. Ooh, you get some nasal stuff. I did that right in the works.
Yeah, we tried. Tried it one time. It was yummy.
I'll just
It's
put
great.
your face in one part of your face.
Commodore. This is Zach's iPod.
Okay.
And I put some stuff on there. Yeah, you can do that.
Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Astachari Chakari ISKCON Bhagavad Church Shri Prabhupada ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnu Bhagavad Paramahamsa Purika Church Ashtotra Shri Srimad Divine Grace Shri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava ki Jai. Namacharya Shri Haridas Thakur ki Jai. Prem Shri Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhakta ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gokul Ganan Sham Rasul and Giri Govardhan ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham ki Jai. Navadip Mayapur Dham ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham ki Jai. Jagannath Swami ki Jai. Gam Gam ki Jai. Yamuna ki Jai. Tulsi Devi ki Jai. Vasu Devi ki Jai. Sri Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai. Transcendental Book Distribution ki Jai. Shri Prabhupada ki Jai. Samveda Bhaktivinoda ki Jai. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to the assembled devotees. All glory to Shri Guru and Ranga. Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste Narasimhaya. Namaste No. Oh.
There's some plastic ones right on the shelf. They're somewhat invisible, but they're see-through.
You got some? No? Do you have any customers? Would you like a little prasad, vegetarian sacred food?
Always.
Okay. Just let us know how much. Is that enough?
Where are you from originally?
Oh, where am I from? New York.
Yeah.
Could you tell?
Where?
Where?
Oh, where in New York?
Bird, where? What part?
Sometimes it comes in. That is one. I love it. Same as this. Would you like any more?
No, I'm good, that's perfect.
Okay, how about a little sweet?
Just a little.
A little touch?
And some milk. Okay.
What is it?
Pardon?
What is
Jessica.
Jessica.
I'm a New Englander. Lived in Manhattan.
Oh, you did? I'm sure a little time after I did. I was last, lived there in, oh my God, 79. That's when I lived there.
That's what I was there.
No kidding.
I don't
And how old are you then? 4 years old.
have no idea.
Couldn't remember at all.
I lost count lifetimes ago.
Okay, Jessica. Understood. Anyway, I mentioned to Leela Sarah that I'm always looking to see if she's back in class schedule. How about this huge, oh, this is actually a pepper. Sharp. One or two? Or two? One. We got some of this. How about a little of the sweet?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a lot of this stuff left over. Good. But Chris, would you like some? Oh, no.
Yeah, just a little bit.
You can do it.
It's like
How much you want?
Take a good amount.
A good amount. More than that.
I'm glad this worked.
Yeah, without Hussy Grounding, we need this someone to.
Yeah.
I'll probably take the Oscar and say stuff.
100. Two.
Yeah. Just one of whatever goes on.
One.
What is that?
Looks like what's left over. The same
I-
substance.
Yeah, I'll take.
More? Okay. That's the real one.
We like to know.
Let's take some of this in a cup. Did Jamal go to the farm?
Actually, was there?
He's here.
Was there for you last?
Oh, that's right, I saw him.